Hey Jim, it's good to talk to you today. How you doing today, my friends?
Good. It's good to talk to you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. Talking to you today from New York City. How is sunny Sydney this Saturday?
It's pretty sunny. It's nice.
Very good. Very good. Well, it's about time we had this conversation. This is the pilot episode of Driving Optimism, where you and I talk about how to affect change in the world.
Excellent. Let's do it.
Cool. Well, I guess in order to get started, we should tell the people a little bit about who we are and why we're doing it. So I was thinking we do a little bit of just how the podcast is going to run mechanically. And then perhaps we do a brief intro of ourselves and why we're here. But I want to spend most of the time, and I know you do, talking about what driving optimism even means. And perhaps giving people a little bit of a teaser as to some of the topics we'll dive into in future episodes as well. So how does that sound to you?
Sounds great.
All right. So I'm gonna pass the mic because driving optimism is a Jim Galindo trademark.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's really a trademark. It was something we were in the middle of a conversation and talking about, current events and how to be positive and optimistic. And I kind of just started talking about what I thought that meant. And luckily, I mean, I'm grateful you were paying attention, because why would you pay attention to me? But you caught on to that driving optimism. And it was really around, I was talking about what optimism is. And, in this day and age, is it really optimism, or is it actually doing something in the background to affect an outcome, therefore creating some optimism? So something's being done, somebody's attacking the problem, somebody understands the problem and has solutions. So that's really what it was about. And we just kind of leapt and got all excited about it from there. And here we are talking about it.
Yeah, here we are talking about it. There are some sirens in the background because, as you know, we're recording during pre-apex of COVID-19 here. So just to date ourselves, this is the 27th of March, 2020, to give us some context. But let's go back into what you were talking about with driving optimism. I did quote you.
Oh, wow. That's, I think, the first time it's ever happened for me. So please quote me.
I quoted you. Driving optimism with analysis, forward thinking, challenging ideas and assumptions, get where we need to go. So what you were really talking about is optimism itself is not problem solving. But if we're talking about driving optimism, we're getting into trying to have more influence and efficacy on the outcomes that we want.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, because I think one of the things that I said or I observed before, and what I've been noticing a lot is in the workplace or outside of work, is there's this generic optimism that people have, but it seems to be driven by, somebody's going to solve that problem. Or, it's people recognize there's a problem with something. It could be minor, it could be big, but there's this kind of belief that somebody else is going to do it. Whereas I'm more of the mindset of, okay, if the problem, I'm going to go do some research and find out if somebody's actually trying to solve the problem. And if they are, and it's nice to know that somebody's on the problem, but having just this generic belief that somebody's going to solve the problem just doesn't feel like it's optimism. It's just faith, which faith is a completely different thing. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I do think that if you are hopeful of something that you don't think you can control or have given the control over to another party, and to your point, like this kind of amorphous third party that is almost a way of saying not taking responsibility, then yeah, I mean, and it does go more into the faith category or the hoping category. And I think it also goes into, unfortunately, the passive category, right? The reactive, passive, NIMBY,
Yep.
not in my backyard, not my it's a problem I acknowledge, but it's not my problem to solve. And
Yeah.
I had this I'm very grateful to have grown up in Hawaii. In Hawaii, we had this responsibility to the land itself, which had a life and an energy. And so when you grow up as a kid thinking that you have a responsibility to the land that you walk on, it's a very different perspective than, and then I remember visiting, I won't say the name of the states so that we won't ridicule states. We may tease certain states in the future because we are both from different states, both in Australia and in the US, but this is a big state in the middle of the country, put it that way. And I remember I was there visiting once, and I just saw this person just throw tons of trash out the window, just right outside the window. It was like fast food. And it's just shocking to me, having come from Australia recently, where that would never happen. It just doesn't happen. And the fact that people just think it's okay that they can dump their trash in the street and then someone else will just deal with it, you're defiling yourself. That's your land, that's your country, that's something that's giving you some energy or life. So yeah, that's it can be worse than being optimistic. It can be being abdicating your responsibility as a human.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it can, yes, you're right. Being optimistic sometimes doesn't give some people, empowers them, empowers the wrong word, but it does feel like it exonerates them from any obligation to do something about a problem that they see. And, speaking of, you talking about littering before, it's strange to think about in the 70s when I was growing up as a young child, people littered everywhere. You could drive under a bridge in an outback road and you could just see so many bags of people's trash. They didn't take it to the dump, or there wasn't a trash service that came around to pick it up. And that's significantly changed. So some problems are solved slowly over time. Some problems are solved quickly, but even having the wherewithal to recognize that something is a problem, and then recognizing is this something that I need to look into to see if somebody's solving it, or actually I guess it's difficult to manage and own a lot of problems in your life, or society problems in particular, but those people that feel obligated to take on those challenges, it could be within, they could be researchers or entrepreneurs, those types of people that feel the obligation to go do that. But in general, it's good that we're classifying or clarifying what optimism is, in that there's I guess you can call it fake or false optimism, which is that really faith-based, where you just sort of believe like this, like in literary terms, I guess it's called the deus ex machina, which is the act of God that's going to come in and save everyone, which is a cheap device in literary terms of solving a problem in a story, whereas the hero should be solving the problem, not some sort of random act of God. And then there is, I guess, true optimism. Even you could call it good old American optimism, whereas I think good old American optimism, and optimism in any country, is I see a problem, I'm going to own it and take it on. And I'm optimistic that I have the skills I don't have, I'll figure them out, because I'll continue and drive and persist until I solve the problem. So but I think there's been a displacement of optimism as a sort of generic faith-based concept now, and people talk less about that American optimism, which is taking ownership and driving it until you get a good outcome.
Yeah, where everyone's the hero. You mentioned hero in the literary thing, but like taking the everyone's the hero, how can I help? And sometimes you see the best of people come out in those situations. And I also, since we're defining optimism, I feel like that was ironically, my first whack at it. My first definition or reaction to yours was a bit negative, because to be honest, I often would say I'm an optimist. You and I've had this discussion, and I kind of pride myself on that. But and then you've said back to me that I'm maybe less of an optimist and more of a realist, because I see how bad things can get, but I'm always positive that there's some way to either shape the situation, or as painful as the situation is, be positively shaped by it in some way that allows it to be redeemable, we have no choice but to go through some of these things.
Yeah.
So, but so I do struggle with optimism, because I do think I am, but yet but many people think I'm not, because I do have, I think, kind of a future focus, and a way to view the world in a spectrum of events at the same time that are on a really bad versus could be amazing, and hold those things at the same time, and I think perhaps other optimists don't take that, like, looking at all the different outcomes, positive to negative. They're looking at just the positive outcomes.
Well, and that's interesting you say that. So current events, and I know we both agreed that we didn't really want to cover the current crisis with COVID and stuff, but just in terms of sharing information. So over the last month or two, I've been sharing a lot of information that I've been reading about it, because I don't have a background in epidemiology, but I have a healthcare background. I've written a screenplay in the past that involved epidemiology. So I've got a fair amount of a good grip of understanding of the language that goes along with it. So, and I've been sharing a lot of information with my friends and family on social media so that they get a good grasp of what really is going on. So I try to translate, current data, current analysis, current news events, and contextualize them for those people, because I care about these people. I want them to understand the impact to them and help them make informed decisions. Some people see that as me being negative, and whereas I don't. I feel like I'm actually in the phase where I'm recognizing the problem and I'm communicating the problem. And it's kind of, I don't know if you've ever read John Cotter. It's about leading change, and he's an expert on leading change. And part of that is creating a sense of urgency about it, and that's really what I was doing, was communicating all this information in different ways from different sources, so that the information is not just coming from me, but there's information from experts and data that inform these people. But it was perceived by a number of people that I wasn't being positive or optimistic. And I don't think those really came into play. It was communicating and creating that sense of urgency so that, like I said, people could make informed decisions. And, I've had a few chats with people about that. And I consider myself more a realist I do believe that being a realist and understanding that there is a problem, there are ways to break down problems and strategies to solve problems. And as long as somebody's owning that, or I'm participating in that, or helping with that, or, keeping abreast of how the trend and how that problem is being addressed, I can feel optimistic that something will be done. And so, yeah, I think optimism is just as much about being informed as well as being an owner of a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, obviously you're speaking for yourself. You're also talking about how some people you're interacting with don't necessarily agree, because, and again, some people may, and I think particularly in this time, and I don't even think at this time that we're in right now, I would say just in this presidency, if we go back a few years, it is information overload, which was, it was the fake news kind of kerfuffle. It's just too much. I think I've said to you, having been between Australia and the US during this, and mostly been away, it's like Americans have PTSD, because on the news is just so continuous calamity. And so I do think there is, just to kind of push back a little bit on you, I do think there is a, pardon me, a version of optimism, which is filtering information. And I'm not saying filter bubble. I'm just saying, not that you're consuming the quantity, because there is an overload. And so,
Yes.
Potentially, and then maybe there's a heightened sense of people trying to control the quantity now, and then also really trying to have more good news just right now in this particular period, which is maybe where you're getting pushback. But you've also gotten pushback on this in other instances, right? So this is This is just kind of the current situation.
Yeah, no, you're right, and it's good for you to call that out. That it's people do need to filter things because there is a lot of um, information load coming in and processing that, and it's difficult and it can be overwhelming and it can cause a lot of anxiety in a number of people. I can see it on people that I follow and friends and experts in different fields appearing overwhelmed by what's not just going on now, but even before this. So,
Hey, so
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
with that though, you're welcome, first and foremost. But also let me transition us a little bit to our why, because we were just mentioning family and people, and going back to the problems we think about and that we want to think about more optimistically and get to solutions to, or maybe not even the problems, but the groups. I mean, I think first and foremost, you and I have talked about who is this podcast even for? When we want this podcast to be for people we care about, what I like to call the nearest and dearest.
Yep.
And to be clear, that's not a join. That's not a combined. You aren't nearest and dearest. You're really nearest or and or. But that doesn't sound as good. That's just
yes. Yes, and you're not talking physically, like distance wise. You're talking also emotionally and mentally and spiritually with that cohort that could be anywhere.
Correct. And then the other thing that I'm saying that I just want to call out is this will be a theme that we talk about repeatedly is this concept of both the family that we're born with and the family that we find along the way, right? Our found.
Absolutely.
Yes. That's another kind of synonym a little bit for the nearest and dearest. So
yes.
That's who we're talking to, and this is actually the community we want to solve problems for, because if you look at a time like this when people are stressed and frankly, again, just to not to reference the macro of the current events right now, but the micro is that families are actually together in the same room interacting in new ways that they have never interacted before. And so we're actually hoping, and we are probably cautiously optimistic that this will create some improvements in family. And perhaps to tie it all together, we want to drive that optimism. We want to use this podcast as a way to go into topics such as, the amount of just home as a workplace, how home is a workplace. You and I both come from single parent households, how that works or doesn't work and how that's changed over time. So community itself being frayed. So I'm just kind of highlighting some of the problems before in other episodes and not necessarily in this episode today. But yeah, I mean, any other ones that are kind of, to me, those are kind of the three I think that will be, actually there's probably a fourth one and then I'll pass the mic, but I'll label them loosely homework, right? So that, as I said, the domestic homework and particularly unpaid labor, unacknowledged labor, and then the future of how we interact in the home and what that looks like.
Yep.
Community itself, big C, big changes, society. So that's just a large one. So I'll just stop that. We'll break that into bite-sized pieces.
That could be many episodes.
Yeah, and it will be. It will be. Collaboration, and I'm gonna just say that one really quickly because we'll talk about that a lot as well. And then, and I want you to riff on that if you're interested. But you and I did start talking a while back, not just about family, but a part of family that is often taken for granted, which is our elders and how they interact with the rest of the family, particularly in this time when people like you and I are distributed and not with our grandparents or our great uncles or aunts, or the friends, right? Their found family that became our found family, or what we thought was real family. Because when our grandparents grew up and said someone was auntie or uncle, we just thought they were auntie or uncle. We didn't really, So, in no time like the present to think about our elders, or kapuna, as we would say in Hawaii, they're really an important generation. So anyway, those are kind of the four that I'm thinking about for the future. But pass the mic to you for other themes that you're excited to talk about, or any riffs you have on the ones that I've mentioned.
I would say those are the four common things that you and I speak about quite frequently. Within that, the work in the home, like in particular, I like to focus on within that some of the aspects of what it means to manage the home or manage life. We've talked about quite a bit, and that, you know, I can break down how I run a project for work on any given, like I can just do it. But becoming a parent a few years ago, really, it took me a couple of years, even after I started, to really think about how it is I break down and manage things in the home. I do it the way I do it at work, but actually being able to, I guess, properly plan and execute, because you do it in such a quick time frame and you get so used to it, it's hard to really think about how much work goes into not just actually doing the work, but actually planning and executing the work. It's so much more intensive, and it's so piecemeal. Not piecemeal is not the right way to say it. It's fragmented in that, let's say you're planning something that's 4 or 5 weeks away. You kind of do it gradually over the 4 or 5 weeks, but you do it across multiple platforms and those sorts of things. And it just seems very disjointed. And I find it incredibly frustrating, especially because, my partner, she works one way and I work in a completely different way. And it's not as efficient as it should be. So those sorts of things. And but yeah, community collaboration, elders, that's all point on. We'll add more to that as we continue with episodes.
Yeah, no, I know that you and I will not be short of opinions and topics and problems that we want to solve. But what I wanted to do in the time that we have left today is actually tell people what the structure of this will be like. So I think we're about 20 minutes in to this recording. Generally, our goal is going to be to deliver you podcasts weekly on a weekly cadence, and they will be right around the 25-minute mark. And as we do interviews, which we will do from time to time, won't be a solely interview show. It'll mostly be a couple of topics, this amazing banter that you're hearing right now, a wrap, and hopefully some Q&A, some kind of feedback from the past episode that we bring into the current episode. And we'll talk about kind of feedback and formats in a second. But if we do the interviews, we'll try to break them into two parts. So you get part A and B, 25 minutes. So you just know what you're getting weekly. Again, the soothing voices of Jim Galindo and Shane Mantes. Mm-hmm. And, the other, as I was alluding to, and I'll actually let you kind of talk a little bit about this, but, we don't have all of our formats down. You'll be able to find us at your favorite podcast place, I am sure, by the time you hear this. But also as far as engagement, comments, how we'll get the questions, we'll work those out in the future. I think if there's anything else I usually care about when I'm trying to get into a new podcast and figure out if it's even worth watching. I mean, I guess I would say to the people that have actually listened to the 22-minute or 23-minute mark so far, first of all, thank you. This is the first podcast we're recording. So you've kind of dealt with some audio substandard, but I think today what really matters is heart. And we're doing this because we care about these problems. We want them to be discussed in a public forum, in a thoughtful way, and in a way that ideally moves from thought and discussion into execution and improvement in our communities and in our families and for our nearest and dearest. So we hope that we can move from discussion to action. So that's my hope. That's why I'm here. That's what I hope we can give the people who've listened this long and the ones who listen in the future. So with that, I thank you. I really am grateful to have a partner in crime, in podcast crime. So God help the world that can hear us. But over to you, Jim Galindo, to kind of say your your why and anything else in podcasting details for what we're going to do, what we might do, what you like that I missed.
Yeah, I think the why you've covered extremely well. I think that initial recognition of things through to execution is really important, and I'm really passionate about that. You know, recognizing things and coming up with is one thing, but executing is the most challenging part, and seeing things through, and seeing the outcomes of those, and being optimistic. Not just being optimistic, but creating the optimism through the process of executing on that stuff. And the fact, and probably most importantly, like I'm a parent now. I often say that it changed my worldview to the point where all those things that we find nauseating about our friends telling us about being a parent, they're all true, and it's really transformative. And I want to create a world that's much better for my son, because problems are magnifying because of a number of things. It's climate change, it's population size, it's so many interdependencies, and magnify these things. And I just want us to work out ways to execute successfully on solving those problems. That's it.
Great. Well, hey, I look forward to it. Thanks everyone for listening. Please make sure to rate this podcast, RATE. That's my enunciation. So wherever you get your podcast, if you leave us some stars or some googly faces or some nice word jumble, that I'm sure would help us move forward. And please comment as we are able to get you feedback. And again, thank you for listening. And we look forward to making the future better together as we drive optimism and move the podcast and the plan forward. So thank you, brother. Have a great day over there in Sydney, and I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, be safe and have a great day in New York.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.